This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast.
Hey! Time for school!
Hey, School Success Makers. Today we're joined by David Liebmann, who is the assistant head of school at his charter school in beautiful Boston, Massachusetts. We dive into what it's like running a school there in downtown Boston and so much more. So enjoy this next episode of the School Success Podcast. Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined with a new friend out of Boston, Massachusetts, David Liebmann, who is the assistant head of school at Kingsley Montessori School. Obviously, like I said, they're in Boston, Massachusetts. They're doing some awesome things there, as him and I talked previously about this. So I'm super stoked to have him on the podcast, and I'm sure you guys are going to learn at least one thing that you can bring back to your school to make it better than it is right now. But I'm not going to take any more thunder away from him. I'm going to pass it off to him. David, welcome to the podcast, and please introduce yourself and your school.
Thanks, Mitchell. My name is David Liebmann. I'm the assistant head for the academic program at Kingsley Montessori, which is a toddler through sixth grade Montessori school in historic Back Bay, Boston. So right downtown near Copley Square and the Prudential Center, for those who know the Boston area. We are a school of 300 students, so it's a fairly large Montessori school. And we compete with and are part of an independent school community in New England that includes many smaller K-8 schools and many large, well-known high schools like Phillips Andover, Phillips Exeter, schools like that.
Okay. And obviously being 300 students, I know it's obviously you mentioned bigger for the Montessori side. Do you guys get to, I know we're not talking high school here, but do you guys have any kind of sports programs for the kids that they can compete against some of the other little schools that are close by, or no sports?
So we do have sports. We're very much an urban school. So we're in two buildings, one that's an old brownstone and another that's an old church building that was converted into a school a number of years ago. So we don't have athletic facilities of our own, but fortunately, because of the resources in Boston, we rent space from one of the universities and we use gym space for a basketball program.
Awesome. And anybody who's listening, if you should Google their school, because the building they're in, it is super cool. Just go to Google. I went to Google Earth or Google Maps or whatever and saw it. Beautiful building you guys have there in downtown. So I'm assuming for 300 students, again, I didn't grow up in a downtown setting anywhere. But I just always go, man, how does parent drop-off work for 300 students in a downtown setting? Like, is it crazy in the mornings, and how does that work?
It's actually really easy, in part because we have multiple entrances. So the building that I'm in, which is on Exeter Street, which is the old church building. It's a 6th-floor building, and we have two doors. So we use a front door and a side door, and it makes it super easy. It's about a 15-minute drop-off process in the morning. And many of our families walk to school, and kids ride scooters and bikes to school and bring their dogs and pets. So it's actually a wonderful kind of neighborhood feel, and we're very much an urban school. We're 2 blocks from the Boston Public Library and the finish line for the Boston Marathon. So it's a highly urbanized environment, but it feels like a truly neighborhood school.
Man, well, I know I've interviewed different schools across the country, and one of the things that always fascinates me is some of these schools are very sought after schools for people to want to be enrolled in. And one of the things I thought was super cool, this is specifically from schools, a couple in California I talked to, is people would drive over an hour just to go to the school because, again, charter school setting was those, they opted to go to that school and drive. Do you guys have kind of the same, or you have these people who are, really just, they want to go to Kingsley and they commute like outside the city and it takes them an hour to get in? Do you know if there's a lot of people like that?
For Kingsley, not so much. We are an independent school, and so we're tuition driven, and parents are making the choice to be a part of the community here. I would say 95% of our students are within a 15-minute walk of the school, and then a small percentage drive in from various outlying Boston area communities. Because there are so many independent schools in Boston and lots of choices for students, we don't have as much competition because we're kind of the big player in our neighborhood. That makes us the school of choice for our families pretty easily.
Sweet. Does that also help with when re-enrollment, obviously I know you guys are probably in the middle of that right now. Does that help keep at capacity, or do you guys have to, I'm assuming once you guys get a kid in, if they're not moving out, they're just going to move up until they age out of the program?
Yes and no. So as in the case of many Montessori schools, our enrollment is pyramid shaped, meaning our 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds are the half the school, and then 6 to 12-year-olds is the other half. So typically what happens is parents are attracted to Montessori as a program for early childhood. They know Montessori as a sort of a brand, so to speak, for early childhood education. Because we're in 2 buildings, there's a natural break point where people can say, I've done your early childhood program and now I'm going to move on to another school. Many families and students will stay, which is great, and that's what, of course, we want them to do. So they'll come into our, what we call lower elementary, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade program. So Montessori, of course, is mixed age in one classroom. And many of those kids will stay for upper elementary, which is 4th, 5th, and 6th grade.
Okay. And I love that. I love how Montessori has multiple age groups. I know my son, we love Montessori and love the school that he's in with that. And I've seen it work, and it's weird to think about, but I've seen it work, and I just love the thought process of it. So I get that. That's a cool, I like how you mentioned it's a pyramid, upside down pyramid. Would that be? Wait, like a whole bunch at the bottom and then it funnels up to the top. Well, this is something I've asked a lot of the schools that, they stop at 6th grade, 8th grade. Do you guys ever anticipate, again, I know Montessori is typically not into high schools, but do you guys ever anticipate going, hey, we'd love to add on a Montessori high school? Is that ever in the playing cards?
Probably not a high school program, but potentially a small middle school program. For us to add 7th and 8th grade, for us would potentially make a lot of sense. Something we may explore in the next couple of years. As I said, there are lots of options in the Boston area, lots of long-standing independent schools. So many of our families will go on to leave Kingsley in 6th grade and go on to some of the really great 7 through 12 or K-12 independent schools and graduate from those schools. Many will also go into the Boston public exam schools. So Boston has super public education, and that's definitely a source of competition for us. And the Boston exam schools are a great resource for families that have gone through the Montessori program here and then are looking to do a really challenging middle and high school program.
Okay, I love it. Well, something I always like to ask people, especially when it's a place I've never been, which I've actually never been to Boston before, is what is something fun to do in Boston that you love to do? Is there a certain food you got to try, a certain place you have to go? What would you say?
Boston is famous for lots of history, and one great way to do that is a walking tour or a duck boat tour. So the duck boats are connected to our school because it's a Kingsley family actually that owns that company. So plug for them, but lots of folks do the duck boat tour. So duck boats, as you may know, are modeled after old military amphibious vehicles. They drive on the land and then go into the water. So people can do a tour on the Charles River and then drive through downtown Boston and see some of the historical sites. So lots of places to see, the Old South Church, Faneuil Hall, the Boston Common. There's so much history. When I drive into the city, I drive by the first church in Boston, which has a plaque on the wall that says, I think founded 1630. Of course, Harvard University, oldest university in the United States, right across the river in Cambridge, founded in the 1600s. So there's lots of great history here. People often come to Boston to sort of soak up that history.
Oh, okay. I do really want to do that because it's something that, and I'm sure this is what would happen if I went to Boston, is when my wife and I went to D.C. a few years back, and just like seeing the things that you've read about and seen in movies, but read about in your history for all these years, and then you're like, whoa, it's real. It's right in front of me. It's like, whoa. So all the things in Boston, and that would be really, really cool to experience, like our nation's history, and it'd be a kind of like a surreal feeling, I'm assuming. So duck boat tours. I got to do that. All right. Appreciate it. So jumping into what I love to ask the guests on the podcast is, I'm wanting school leaders obviously to listen to this podcast and learn and see what are other schools up against. So if we dive into challenges, what are some challenges that Kingsley's currently up against, and what are you guys doing to fight those challenges that you guys have?
So I don't think I mentioned to the listeners, but I mentioned to you when we spoke that I've been in independent schools and private schools for 30 years in different parts of the country. So Kingsley is the first Montessori school that I've been in, but I've been in very large K-12 schools, very small specialized programs for independent school students. And I would say all of them are facing headwinds in terms of enrollment prior to COVID. COVID's given lots of schools an enrollment boost, but tuition is expensive, and there's a misunderstanding, I think, among the general public that private schools are only for a certain kind of kid, only for a kid from, for example, a wealthy background, and that all private schools have really deep pockets, and that's certainly not the case. Most don't. Most don't have endowments. Kingsley does not have an endowment, for example. There are schools that do, Andover, Exeter have endowments close to $1 billion or more, so that it's that extreme. And I think a challenge for the independent school marketplace in general is to make ourselves accessible to a broad range of families, and we do that through financial aid, tuition assistance, tuition discounting, various names for similar things. And I think Kingsley's no exception. We are definitely a school of choice for our neighborhood, but we have to make sure that we're reaching a broad range of students. And as we move through diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations all the time as a school, making sure that we're reaching out to a broad audience and a broad student body is super important, as well as a diverse faculty and staff.
Yeah, and obviously you got to make enough money to be able to pay your staff to keep them to stay, so they don't want to leave, of course. So it's a double-edged sword, of course, that you're up against. Are you guys at full capacity, or you're like, hey, we're going into this fall, we really need to get back up to this specific number to help cover all the costs we, of course, have as a school?
We had a little bit of attrition because of COVID, so people were leaving the city for the suburbs and for more rural places in northern New England. So our enrollment dipped a little bit, but it's back up to where we'd like to see it, and I think moving forward we have a lot of confidence that it's going to go even higher. So coming into this admission season, we have a pretty good sense that we're going to probably grow by about another 15 to 20 students going into next year.
That's awesome.
And that's, for a small school, that's a huge number. I've been in smaller schools. I was in a school of 200 students where, every family, every child made a huge difference on the bottom line. So if you lost one family or two families or five families, it made a big swing. Kingsley's a little bit insulated from that, and obviously larger schools are even more insulated from that. But I think just maintaining enrollment is going to be an ongoing challenge for all independent schools.
Yeah. What other challenges you guys up against? Any others worth mentioning?
I think the DEI challenges of the political moment and of the cultural moment are really important for us as we have conversations about how to best support a diverse faculty and staff and a diverse student body and family community. I think there's no one right answer to that, but we're not in a place where we're avoiding conversations. We're not in a place where we are burying our heads in the sand. We want to have tough conversations. We want to be as inclusive as possible. And that's an important part of the school's mission and philosophy. And I think that's true for many independent schools. I think in different parts of the country, the conversations are quickly taking different direction, going in different directions. And so I am aware of collegial conversations with friends in schools around the nation who are really struggling with this. And I think it's such important work as the demographics of the country shift, as some inevitable things happen, and as racial justice issues come rightly to the surface. I think it's important that we all have those conversations and try to make good progress on those fronts.
And I know you guys as a private school, I'm assuming you guys kind of get to pick your own curriculum within reason. Obviously, kids need to learn certain things, of course, to progress. But being a private school, are you held by different standards than a regular public school who's kind of like, hey, you have to do this because it was voted in by the school board or something like that? How are you guys do that?
So independent schools typically are exempt from any kind of public curricular requirements, and that's the value of an independent school. And there are many different kinds of independent schools with many different kinds of missions. So they're all boys, all girls, they're co-ed, they're K-8, they're K-12, they're military schools, they're religious schools, an incredible variety of independent schools. I think there's 1,600 independent schools under the umbrella of the National Association of Independent Schools, which is the nonprofit association of those schools. In our region, we're accredited by the Association of Independent Schools in New England, and that is an accrediting body that looks at our operations and curriculum every 10 years, but they don't tell us what to teach or how to teach it. So they want us to be clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it, but they hold us not to outside standards, but to our own standards, essentially.
Okay. All right. Well, This is the best part of the podcast, I always tell guests. This is where you get to brag. You get to brag about Kingsley, what's going awesome there, what's going really good that you guys want to be able to, this is where you get to toot your own horn. So what's going really good for Kingsley there in Boston?
We have really extraordinary faculty and staff and fantastic families and students. So it is no exaggeration to say kids come to school excited to join the community every day and be part of a classroom. They love school, and our teachers love teaching them, and it really shows in lots of ways. We have very little attrition on faculty and staff, so we have folks who come here and like to stay here. Same with our families. I think it's a very diverse community, so 30% of our families are families of color, and that's great in Boston, where diversity has been historically something of a challenge in different ways. I think that there are lots of particular programmatic things that we're very proud of. For example, our sixth graders just got back from the Montessori Model UN in New York City, so they were there for a 4-day, 3-night meetup with other students from other schools in different parts of the country. They all did research on different countries and researched issues in different parts of the countries that they were part of, and did a Model UN. Unfortunately, the UN itself is not open for tours right now because of COVID, but they were able to really do a deep dive with other students and other schools around exactly the same kinds of issues that are facing the international community.
That's awesome. I love that they get to experience that, and I never got to do that. I was homeschooled my whole life, so there's certain things I didn't get to do that other kids got to, but that's really cool. Wow. Any other things you want to share to brag on?
We have a great art and music program. Our co-curriculars are super strong. We have really talented artists and working musicians who are our instructors for those. We have a great physical education program, and likewise our lead PE instructor, who's been here for, I think, over 20 years, is, I think, competing on Ninja Warrior this year. So he's fantastically fit and shares that with his students, and they love working with him. Lots of really wonderful things happening in classrooms. So when I came to Kingsley, not having been in a Montessori school before, I didn't know what to expect. And when I visited classrooms, what I saw is, Montessori is multi-age and highly student-directed within the structures that the teachers build. And so there are lessons that the teachers offer kids. And you might walk into a room and see some students doing poetry, some students doing math, some students doing writing, all at the same time. So we typically have 20 to 25 kids in a classroom with 3 teachers, 2 lead teachers and an assistant teacher. And that model works really well for us. So there's lots of individual, intrinsically motivated education happening where kids are doing things that are really interesting to them, and yet they're meeting broad standards and moving on to the next level in the next schools with great skills, great content knowledge, and really a lot of self-motivation as learners. So the thing that I like most about Montessori is the sense that kids own their educations. It's not something that's done to them, but something they're active partners in and really active leaders in for each of them.
I do love that. And something, you guys have been around for a while now. This is throwing you a curveball, David, the curveball. So any kids that have gone through Kingsley that have come back as teachers or that you guys have kept in touch with that are now doing, like, they're a politician, they're a huge business owner, they're an executive, like any cool wins or cool stories that you've heard come out of a kid who attended Kingsley?
Lots of alums who've gone on to really successful careers in lots of areas. And I think we don't have any alums. Let me think about this for a second. We don't have any alums on the staff right now, but we have Montessori alums from other Montessori programs who came to join the school. In terms of alumni, one young woman I spoke with who owns a marketing firm in New York City, went to work for NBC Universal, did great things there, and then went out on her own. Really credits Kingsley and the Montessori model in general for being a self-motivated learner and feeling a great sense of confidence and ownership over what she does. And so she's something like a 28-year-old CEO with a pretty large company. Other similar stories of people who have gone on to pretty interesting careers and career paths. One thing that I would say is true of Montessori is, as is the case with many independent schools, kids don't follow a single path. It's not all, doctors or lawyers or business people or politicians. It's a huge range of things. And so one of the things that I'm most excited about of the independent schools that I've been a part of for 30 years is that my oldest former students are now in their late 40s and doing incredible things, whether it's raising great families or leading great social change initiatives or working in climate change work or working in nonprofits around the world or in business. They have all learned in different ways, and through anything that I gave them, but I think through their own sense of self, that anything is possible for them if they choose to do it. And if they choose to put their energy and time into it, they can make it happen. And they can make it happen for themselves, but they can make it happen for their communities and the people around them as well.
So good. And I'm assuming this has to have happened, or maybe it's currently happened, where kids graduated or gotten out and now has kids, and the kids are going to Kingsley. Has that happened? I feel like that has to have happened by now.
It has. So Kingsley in various forms has been around almost 100 years. It became Kingsley Montessori about 30 years ago, but it was Kingsley School since the 1930s. So there are definitely multiple students who are several generations of Kingsley families. And that's a neat thing to see in any school.
That is so cool. And I know when you're mentioning people going into like executive roles in business and stuff, I think one of the biggest plugs that Montessori schools could use is just Jeff Bezos, who is obviously raised Montessori, is a huge Montessori fan. And I just found this out yesterday because my wife showed me. He has Bezos Academy, where he's like launching all these Montessori schools across the country for free tuition for those with low income and those that need help and stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And so he's like launching all these across the country. And it's like, okay, if he did Montessori, he turned out, pretty good for launching Amazon and all that stuff. So I was like, everybody can launch on Amazon now, but that was so cool. I didn't know that about him until just recently. Well, as we wrap up, I always share one last question that I want to hear answer, and this is your opportunity to share any encouragement, inspiration, or advice, anything you want to share for any of the other school leaders that are listening.
Yeah, the thing that I would say to other school leaders is, let's prepare the kids for the world they're going into. And when I think about that, I think particularly about climate change, and I think about social change that's going to be part of that, and social change that's happening anyway. So a kid like Greta Thunberg, the young woman from Europe who is such an outspoken advocate for climate change, addressing climate change, I think the world that we grew up in, the times that we grew up in, are clearly shifting really rapidly. I'm in my early 50s. I've been in schools for 30 years. The world I grew up in is a different world than what kids are going to be going out into. And I think as someone with a science background and an environmental studies background, I feel like we can't delay in teaching them about ways that they can start to address these challenges. It's going to be the driving force in their lives for the next century, if not more. And I think it's incumbent upon schools to really help them think about the scientific implications, the moral and ethical implications, the cultural implications, and thinking, coming out of COVID, how do we pay attention to the needs of the people who are most on the margins, the disabled, folks who have far fewer resources than most American kids, and certainly most independent school kids. I think that's going to be incredibly important for school leaders to be thinking about and working on, and empowering the kids to own. So going back to the Montessori model, the most powerful education that I have ever seen is when a kid feels like they own what's happening to them. And it's something that I think many different schools do in many different ways. Montessori has a particular approach historically, but what I want to see from a student coming out of any school is that they feel like they've been empowered to own their lives and address the challenges that they'll inevitably face. And if we do that, then we're giving them the opportunity to lead a meaningful life. And that's the important work that we do as educators.
Sounds like David should write a book. That was a pretty good spiel right there, David. That was good.
Thanks.
And I agree. And I love what you guys are doing there at Kingsley. And I know you guys are going to continue to be there for years and years to come and instill that in students. So just obviously thank you for taking time to be on the podcast today and for continuing to pour into these kids and love these kids, and wish you and Kingsley obviously nothing but the best as you guys continue to grow and inspire this next generation. And obviously if I can ever be of help or something, you have my number, you know where to find me. But thank you so much, David, for being on the podcast today.
Mitchell, my pleasure. And I would extend to you an invitation to come visit us if you're ever up in Boston, and really any listener who finds themselves walking down Newberry Street in the summer. You're going to walk right by our school. Please come knock on the door and we'll give you a tour.
You got yourself a deal. Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Well, as always, another huge shout out to David Liebmann for taking time and being on the podcast today. I had a blast interviewing him, learning about Kingsley and Boston and all the things that they're doing. And as always, I'm hoping you guys can take at least one thing from today's episode, take it back to your school to make it better than it is right now. And as always, if you need any help growing enrollment, connecting better with your families with digital marketing and technology, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us online at schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. We'll be here next week with another awesome guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.